Question number 4, the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Does he agree with Professor Max Abbott, who said, quote, 10 DHBs are in financial strife. Despite big moves to increase efficiency and extend services the best they can, I think it does suggest that more funding is required to health generally and also mental health, end quote. If not, who is out of touch, Professor Abbott or him?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, the only person who might be out of touch is any former minister in a government which ran up $160 million of deficits in 17 DHBs, but who now complains that a greatly reduced deficit of $60 million is out of control. As the member knows, health has remained the government's #1 funding priority. That's why we've invested an extra $2.2 billion in health over the next 4 years for new initiatives and to meet cost pressures and population growth. This government has also increased mental health and addiction services funding from $1.1 billion to over $1.4 billion.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
If Professor Abbott is wrong and half our DHBs are not in financial strife, how does he account for the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Ophthalmologists' comments that all DHBs had a significant backlog of patients needing follow-up eye appointments, with as many as 7,000 in one DHB alone, and the waiting lists are a national problem?
I remind the member questions need to be concise. The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Well, look, obviously in ophthalmology there's 1 or 2 DHBs which need to lift their game, but you've got to place that against the background of greatly increasing demand. So in terms of injections for glaucoma, the demand for those injections, because we've got this new technology, has increased by 3 to 5 times. But the background in ophthalmology is we're doing 100% uplift in operations and appointments compared to a number of years ago. So it's actually pretty good.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Can he confirm the college had asked him for more resources for public hospital eye clinics, for training specialist nurses and more ophthalmologists in March 2015? If so, what action has he taken to address the disgraceful situation of Kiwis losing their sight through poor ministerial oversight?
Either of those two supplementary questions, the Honourable Dr
I haven't met a
Jonathan
group
Coleman.
of doctors in the whole time I've been involved with healthcare that hasn't wanted more resources.
So
that's how it goes. But that letter I had from the ophthalmologists, actually it was focused more on them wanting more decision-making rights over prioritising patients. So there are a range of issues they were discussing. But of course, people want more resources all the time. And the answer to that is there's actually been an extra $4.2 billion that's gone into the health sector over the last 8 years.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Did the Health and Disability Commissioner advise him that he had been made aware of the serious situation and unacceptable delays in eye treatment in Southern DHB in mid-2015? If not, when did he become aware of the problem?
Again, either of those two supplementary questions, the Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Why did he require $10 million in efficiencies from Southern DHB in 2015-16 when they were running a $34 million deficit, were unable to treat serious eye conditions in a timely manner, and were struggling to keep up with orthopaedic surgery, doing fewer operations, elective operations in 2015-16 than in 2008-9 under a Labor budget?
Look,
the Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
I think the case of Southern DHB has been well canvassed, and as you know, we sacked the DHB board last year, $42 million deficit, down to $35 million this year, and improving with a sustainable plan.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
A supplementary question, the Honourable Annette King.
Why is he refusing to front up and be interviewed on the disastrous neglect of eye treatment around New Zealand, something the college did tell him about in March 2015, 18 months ago?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan
Look, that's
Coleman.
just completely incorrect.
No,
I've answered
not.
a number of questions from the media on that. I did a stand-up outside in the lobby yesterday, so the member is actually misleading the House on that one.
Order.
Order, Mr Speaker.
Order. I'll hear from the Honourable.
Mr Speaker, I take exception to that, and I could table I could table from Radio New Zealand the refusal by that minister to go on.
Order. Order. I'm going to order. Order. Speaker's ruling 47.4 is quite clear that you cannot say that another member's making that up. So I require Jonathan Coleman to stand and withdraw the last part of his answer.
I withdraw and apologise.
Question number 5.